everybody, to the panel discussion for a retrospective on the development of the MS4 permit and its regulations. I'm Larry Schaffner with Thurston County, the moderator for this session. Our three panelists include Bill Moore, who we pulled out of retirement from Department of Ecology for this event, and Dettelbach with City of Redmond, and Bill Leif, Snohomish County. Today, they will share their experiences and perspectives on key events that shape the trajectory of the permit. Bill Moore will kick off by introducing the basis for the permit's structure and framework. That will be followed by Ann, who will delve into the standards of compliance, and Bill Leif will explore the evolution of the monitoring framework. We'll also set aside some time near the end to allow the panelists to respond to any questions you may have. So, Bill, you're on.
Good morning. I was asked to speak a little bit about the structure of the permits because in Washington, the structure of municipal stormwater permits differs pretty significantly in the way EPA had envisioned, particularly the phase 2 permits, to be structured. Back when EPA adopted their phase 1 rules, back I think in '93, they were basically application requirements that required the phase 1 permittees to come up with stormwater management programs which were reviewed and approved by regulatory agencies, and in Washington, that was Ecology. That was a very resource-intensive effort. It went on and on for years. EPA realized that was not going to work for phase 2, given the literally hundreds of phase 2 permittees around this, not just in the state, but across the country, maybe thousands. So they came up with their phase 2 rules. They effectively had the minimum requirements laid out in sort of an outline form and told the permittees that they should be, filling in those outlines in a way that meets the federal standard of maximum extent practical, but didn't provide a whole lot of meat on the bones, if you will. The whole concept was that it was a pretty much self-implementing program. That was the plan. EPA rules, phase 2 rules were appealed, and the courts, EPA basically lost, and the courts concluded that the rules was a self-regulatory scheme and impermissible. So we are a little behind the curve in Washington in adopting the phase 2 permit, the first one, 2007. We chose to do it a little differently. I think that the argument was that if you had to go and review and approve a program, different local government programs, presumably you had a yardstick from which to measure whether that was good enough or not. And the thought was, rather than wait to try and figure what that should be later and force the permittees into bringing a whole lot of rocks to Ecology for approval, we chose to do it slightly differently and place the yardstick directly into the permits. And hence the permits were fairly prescriptive in terms of what expectations were. They were unique, I think, across the country in that respect, and partly because of Washington's unique history. We had the Puget Sound Action Team, which is the predecessor to the predecessor of the partnership, the current partnership, that had identified stormwater as a significant issue in the Puget Sound area. And that created a lot of interest around that. We also had a fairly favorable political environment in terms of writing the permits. There was also the state legislature was recognizing that there was a significant issue around stormwater and was willing to help out certainly in the early areas of the permit. And then we also had and I'll say this, a number of very supportive and helpful local governments in helping us move the permits along and kind of doing the stormwater science, if you will. So I think that all came together to form a permit structure that was pretty significantly different than what EPA had envisioned. But I think we're finding, at least last I saw it was looking the other states were tending to move towards the same direction that Washington went, which was the kind of laying out the minimum requirements of stormwater management program. So that's a little history about it. I don't know, Bill, you were around when we were developing it, and I don't know if you had some thoughts that kind of may differ or not. And Larry and Dan, you were there too.
Mm. Bill, what do you think were some of the unique aspects of Washington's permit framework relative to what was going on in other parts of the country?
Well, for example, other parts of the country, many states just took EPA's rules and plopped them into a permit and issued it. And there was no, they didn't expand on what EPA had identified in the rules. And they just said, you folks have to develop a program, a program for controlling new development, redevelopment, construction, stormwater runoff, or pollution prevention and good housekeeping, without much more detail as to how detailed that had to be, and what the minimum requirements around that should be. The other thing that made us a little different is that Washington State, because of the toxics initiative that was passed in the mid 80s, the Ecology had a fairly strong funding program in terms of our, to fund our permit program, and a stable funding program through permit fees. And very few states, if any, have that. I mean, you can look just south of us to Oregon, and they've been struggling in terms of how to fund their program and manage it. And I think that's been to the detriment of not only to the program on the state level, but also the program for local programs, because they just don't have the consistency that I think Washington had, nor I know it cuts both ways, but nor the huge amount of kind of resources that we could provide to local governments. And the resources, I mean, literally in stormwater resources we provide, I know this, when I was there, we had spent through the legislature, through grants and so on, we were able to provide local governments with literally millions of dollars to address stormwater issues.
And did you have something you wanted to interject on?
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect that when we were writing the 2007 permit, the team at Ecology sort of looked at every single part of the requirement and considered, do we want to track with what EPA requires, or do we want to go further, have a more protective permit, be more prescriptive or prescriptive in a different way? So for instance, EPA requires that we manage discharges from MS4s to waters of the US. Department of Ecology decided that we want to regulate discharges to waters of the state. So we're not limiting it to discharges to surface waters, but we're also considering discharges to ground, because in Washington State, that's a very important set of our waters. So at every step, Ecology was weighing, where to fall in terms of sticking with EPA's requirements or moving beyond. So I think that's another, we can point to different parts of the permit that go beyond perhaps the federal minimums. The other point I would make, which is a slightly different point, Bill indicated that the permits are more prescriptive than what you saw around the country. And I like to think of it as Ecology told permittees what standards they needed to meet, what the requirements are, but they didn't tell them how to get there. So that's where the flexibility, that's where it's sort of the balance between being prescriptive and also letting permittees develop programs that work for them.
Yeah, I think that Washington tried to clearly define the line of compliance, what was compliance, and conversely, what was not compliant.
So Bill Leif, you worked for a phase one jurisdiction at the time when the sausage was being made. What were things like from your perspective?
Well, I think Bill and Ann did a good job of covering it. When the first permit came out, well, I started working at Snohomish County in 1991. So I got handed these federal regulations and my boss said, "What do you think of these?" And I said, "Wow, there's a lot of stuff in here. Are we working on it?" And the answer was, "Well, yeah, we're kind of starting working on it and lawyers are really telling us we need to." And, you look at the federal regs and you think, I don't know clearly what to do as a county. And we worked with Ecology and came up with a really good basic start by 1995. And yet still, we had to send a bunch of stuff to call. We had to get our program, which is our permit requirements, approved by Ecology. And from my perspective, by the time 2007 rolled around, it looked like Ecology was thinking, man, if we're going to have to do this for 110 individuals, we're never going to finish. So we've got to write a next permit that doesn't require for every single permit an individual approval of permit conditions. And also a number of people were starting to say, it looks like these phase one permittees have 6 different sets of conditions. We're troubled by that. And some of us said, well, that's a reasonable thought. So it was an evolution from taking federal regulations, as Bill said, that didn't tell us what we had to do either for the regulators or the permittees, and trying to come up with something that was going to work with the idea that we're going to keep working on it, which we did.
One of the key aspects that I think is rather unique for Washington is our stormwater permit is not only the NPDES, the federal portion, but it also includes the state waste discharge permit aspect to it. And I believe that's really significant. And along with that, marriage puts a twist on compliance with standard that I think is uniquely Washington state. And so, Anna, why do you kick it in about the compliance with standards aspect of the permit construct?
So the permits all include this section called S4F and compliance with standards. I think it crosses both sides of the state. And it sort of deals with a thorny issue we have in Washington state, because here we have a state law called the Water Pollution Control Act, which requires municipalities, so permittees, to comply with state water quality standards. And that's surface water quality standards, groundwater standards, sediment standards. So on the one hand, we need to comply with water quality standards, but on the other hand, municipal permittees can't fully control what comes into our public storm system. So they can't control what comes in, they can't control what exits and what enters the environment. And so they can't necessarily prevent pollution from traveling through their permitted storm system to receiving waters. Unlike factories, industries, we don't control the inputs, quite the opposite. So the concern became that without some special program or permit requirement or consideration, the permit could in fact be setting up a situation in which compliance with the permit is just not possible. We would not be able to avoid violating water quality standards. And Ecology didn't want this to happen. And of course, permittees didn't want to be in a position where they were constantly violating the permit every time it rains. So what Ecology did is they developed this permit section, S4, S4F, that lays out what is, in essence, an adaptive management approach, an alternative compliance pathway that gets triggered when a discharge from our storm systems, from our public storm systems, cause or contribute to a violation of water quality standards. So basically, they laid out a program that says, when you enact this program, when you take the steps laid out in this section of the permit, you are complying with the permit and complying with the permit's requirement to meet water quality standards. Now this was, I would say this was the part of the permit that was most carefully worded and took a lot of coordination with our Assistant Attorney General. And it was also hotly debated as part of the 2007-2008 appeals process. I think Bill Moore pointed out that we spent 5 days in testimony in front of the Pollution Control Hearings Board. And the board had already decided that Ecology had the authority and the duty, in fact, to require compliance with water quality standards. What we needed to work out were the details of that compliance pathway that S4 and S4F provided. And we needed to make sure that it was clear, that it provided enough accountability, that it was transparent, and it met the needs of the permitted community, so the local communities, met the needs of Ecology as the regulator, and it also met the needs of other interested parties, folks who really wanted to ensure that the cities and counties under these permits were doing everything they could to protect water quality and prevent water quality standards. So it's actually a very powerful part of the permit. It's actually, you know, it's a very elegant part of the permit, and I think it's a pretty misunderstood part of the permit.
So speaking of interested parties with opinions, during this appeal on this issue, some of the environmental advocacy community was exploring why not regulate municipal discharges at the end of pipe like we do for industrial and construction permits. What happened with that?
I don't recall specifically what happened in terms of the appeal process, but it's really not practical in the same way that it is at an industrial site. I mean, the end of pipe is the end of the outfall, and I don't know how many outfalls Snohomish County has, but any given jurisdiction will have multiple tens, dozens, hundreds. For large jurisdictions covering broad geographic areas, you know, there could be several hundred outfalls. And so to regulate the discharge at each outfall point would, first of all, require an enormous monitoring program, but it also sort of is, if it is in conflict with the philosophy that underlies these permits, which is they give you a programmatic approach to ensuring compliance. So by implementing the programs, by doing, you know, the S5 program components, Ecology was saying, you implement this program, you implement these elements, you are complying with the permit. Taking a end of pipe approach is very different. Bill Leif, I don't know if you would see it differently. I don't know if Bill Moore is still with us and can add to that, but that's my quick reaction.
So Bill Leif, your thoughts and experiences on the evolution of S4F?
As a municipality that's an intervener in a current appeal on this part of the permit, I'll just say that Ann did a great job of describing. She said great stuff, I guess. That's what I can tell you. I can hear my lawyer kicking me under the table.
Okay. Yeah, this is a pretty high stakes issue at the time of the appeal for the permittees. And my recollection is there was a lot of coordination amongst the permittees to speak with a collective voice during the appeal process, to be able to share very specific local stories on how this could play out should the outcome require end of pipe compliance, a demonstrative approach versus programmatic presumptive approach. And so it was very high stakes for the permittees, and I thought they did a very eloquent job in presenting their case, and the outcome in the ruling represented that.
And I would say, you know, Ecology saw this as trying to what they would say reconcile the unreconcilable, to balance the requirement to comply with water quality standards and, you know, just what is practically a limit on controlling what enters your storm system. So they wanted to acknowledge that and, in essence, provide what some would call a permit shield to permittees. And I think we still struggle as permittees, and Ecology over the years has really tried to work hard to help us understand what S4F is and what it does and how it helps support permit programming.
Yeah, and then related to that, we have a question in the chat regarding the notification aspect of S4F, S4F point one. So permittees, when they become aware that they are violating water quality standards due to stormwater discharges, have an obligation to notify Ecology. How does the intent differ for S4F notifications versus, for example, the G3 notifications?
So G3 notifications happens very quickly. If something's hitting your system, you're concerned that it could cause environmental damage or threatens human health, you call the state number, the ERTS number, depending on what region you are, it's a different phone number, or you submit information via the web. And you're just sort of given basic details about the incident, where it happened, when it happened, how much happened, do you need help, do you have it under control? S4F sort of takes in my perspective, takes a more measured and deeper look at what happened. And instead of looking at the storm system itself, you're moving to the receiving water and trying to determine, have you actually caused a violation of the state's water quality standards? So you have to do a more thorough scientific analysis to understand if water quality standards have been violated, but you also then have to talk about, or you're encouraged to talk about what actions you are taking, both to protect and restore the site, but then to assure that this won't happen in the future. So you're through your S4F notification, you're sort of reflecting on your permit program and your activities to protect the receiving waters. So they're different. One happens within a day usually, the other you're given a month to collect all the details, to hopefully stabilize the situation, and then to reflect on how your programs work, how your stormwater and other programs work, and then how in the future you would prevent this from happening again. So they are different. I know Ecology has focus sheets or information sheets on their website to sort of lay out those differences more explicitly.
Yeah, I've heard S4F characterized as a mini TMDL, in that it requires the permittee to develop a proposed water quality cleanup plan for the incident, for Ecology to review and approve it, and then monitoring to see if that plan is realizing the outcomes. So, Leif, any additional thoughts, or is that lawyer still kicking you?
I think one thing I'd like to bring out is that, you know, as someone who came into stormwater 30 years ago from working in wastewater, you know, designing wastewater plants, and so I knew what NPDES was, which is why I got handed this in the office. I said, you know what these acronym is? Go figure this out. The NPDES permit system started out as a system that regulated infrastructure such as sanitary sewers, which are built by a city to do something, and they regulate the discharge from the treatment plant. And the city has, or the county, the entity has all the control over that sewer. And especially if it's an industry, if things get bad enough, you can just shut the industry down and the earth still goes on and the problem stops. You can shut the industry down, the problem stops. And then the Congress said, gosh, this stormwater stuff is apparently dirty. Let's take this permit system that was built to regulate infrastructure of a certain type and issue permits to regulate infrastructure that's pipes. So it's the same thing, right? And we found out, no, it's really, really different. And I think S4 is an example of how Ecology was trying to address a main fundamental difference from what the permit system started out with to what we got handed and what we were obliged to do with it.
Great point.
So, Bill or Ann, has either of your jurisdictions had to go through the S4F notification process?
Yes.
Oh, yes. And you know, I would say the on the one end of it, for example, Everett sewer main, a force main breaks, you know, thousands of gallons of sewage come out, run down a little bit of our street going to North Creek. We issue a G3. Water quality standards are obviously violated. We issue an S4F. What's the plan? They fix the pipe. We clean up the street. The paperwork goes through. That's the end of it. The other end of the spectrum is, I think it's currently Appendix 13. Is that correct? In the Phase 1 permit, which is the Duwamish, addresses cleanup in the Duwamish waterway, which I believe started from an S4F process that was recognized was going to be a big effort and turned into its own appendix in the Phase 1 permit. So it is a very flexible, and I think, as Ann pointed out, elegant process and powerful.
So, Ann, describe the experience you went through with your jurisdiction.
So we have submitted several S4Fs. Usually it happens when a construction site has a turbid discharge and that water reaches a creek or the lake and is seen. And for us, it's been a very painless process because you're simply notifying you're providing the details of what happened, and the city provides its response and talks about how it will engage with the contractor or what additional steps it will take to try to ensure it never happens again. In no situation, and none of the S4Fs that I have been involved in at the city of Redmond has our response required additional work beyond our existing programs. Things happen, and the S4F gives you an opportunity to explain what happened and how you're responding. I think it is certainly the outlier for local government for permittees that they have to put together a whole new work program, additional actions beyond their stormwater management program to respond to an S4F. I think usually you can show through the work you're doing or planning to do, or now will plan to do, that that you satisfy the permit requirement. I think that the Duwamish is an outlier in that sense.
So to what extent, if any, do you think the introduction of S4F put a dagger into local ambient monitoring?
So when I was at Ecology, soon after the 2007 permit came out, one of the communities I worked with sent me an email, and the title of it was the death of an ambient monitoring program. And it was this particular jurisdiction's concern that because S4F, you provide that notification when you see a problem in the receiving water. If you don't look, if you don't monitor, if you don't do monitoring, then you won't find problems. And so his concern was that he would be forced to shut down his monitoring program because he did not want to have to submit S4Fs. I don't think S4F killed local monitoring programs. I think, at least I certainly hope that's not the case. We're going to hear about monitoring and how the monitoring programs have evolved in the next segment, but I think other things change the ways and the reasons and the focus of those monitoring programs more than S4F ever did.
Okay, with that segue, we'll let Bill Leif tread into that topic area and how monitoring has evolved in the permit over the years.
Well, thank you, Larry, for the introduction. Get my thing up here. I am Bill Leif, and I've worked at Snohomish County Surface Water Management since 1991 on MS4 permit stuff. So as I've said, I worked there since before the 95 permit was issued. And I initially thought it would be easy to give a sort of a logical linear path history of how the 95 permit evolved, inexorably into the 2019 permit requirement for monitoring. But that easy story eluded me. And further, I asked a couple of other people who've been with me on this journey, and each one of them laid out storylines I hadn't thought of. So I guess there's a lot of storylines depending on who you were and what you were seeing at the time. But here's what I saw with the monitoring program, and I think with a lot of stuff in the permit as well. The 95 permit was a good start, but some people, including me, thought there were questions that needed answers and further work. And so we talked and talked and talked and brought in other people from groups and positions and points of view and talked some more. And somewhere in there, the Puget Sound Chinook salmon officially became endangered species listed, which only added to the list of stuff we had to talk about. And then we kept talking, and we throw out ideas about what was wrong with what we're doing now and what might be a better idea. And someone would say, well, that idea is no good. And so we tear it apart. And the fancy word for all this is collaboration, which sounds like something you should get paid for. And I did. And it happened among permittees and Ecology and other government agencies and environmental groups and consultants and people from other states. And a lot of it happened in big official meetings and processes. Let me tell you, there were thousands and thousands of person hours spent in big processes. But I suspect even more of it happened in just casual phone conversations and talking before and after lunch and during lunch breaks at other meetings. APWA Stormwater Managers Committee, where we would solve all the world's problems at the Chinese restaurant in Federal Way. And a key thing that happens with this broad spectrum long-term collaboration is that somebody at some point is going to say, hey, what if we did this? And then everyone else is going to laugh and say, that's crazy. That's crazy. That's never going to happen. And most of those ideas just never go anywhere, but some of them just kind of refuse to go away and they float around. And then a few of them take root and they grow into something that later looks like something that's always been there and it's logical and it makes sense and it was meant to be. And part of the fun of this is you never know which crazy idea is going to turn into that thing. So, with specific reference to the 95 permit monitoring program, the 95 permit required permittees to implement, and I quote, a program to monitor the effectiveness of the stormwater management program in reducing pollutants discharged and reducing impacts to surface waters, groundwaters, and sediments. And there was about a third of a page more text than that, and a lot of it was white space. And who was going to do this and who was going to pay was obvious, permittees. But beyond that, a number of things were vague because we just hadn't worked them out. at least to write them down. For example, what does effectiveness look like? What happens if a program's found to be ineffective? And who's supposed to do something if that happens? And another kind of niggling question that kept coming up was, who should pay for this? Not who does pay. Permittees are paying, that's obvious, but who should pay for this? Now, in contrast, the 2019 permit, which is basically has the same monitoring requirement as the 2013 permit, so that's only 18 years after the 95 permit, or one human childhood later, specifically sets out the components of a regional status and trends monitoring program in receiving waters, stormwater program effectiveness monitoring, and source identification monitoring. And there's about, 12 pages of details about all that. But perhaps more amazing, the permittee can do the monitoring and send the data to Ecology, or they can just write a check to Ecology, and if the check doesn't bounce, they've satisfied the monitoring requirement, or they can do some monitoring and send less money to Ecology. But wait, there's more. A permittee, as many of you know, can think up an idea for a monitoring project and apply for a grant that comes out of this regional fund. And if it's approved by the Ecology run process, they get money back out. So permittees can actually make money monitoring, kind of. And a lot of people would say, well, that seems pretty reasonable. Well, how did we get there? In the 2007 permit, there were a lot more details than there were in the 95 permit. The structure was still, permittees will do the monitoring at their expense and send the results to Ecology. As part of that, Snohomish County was required, among other things, to monitor the effectiveness of wet detention ponds built to Ecology standards. So we had to write a monitoring plan, send it to Ecology, they approve it, send us back, we do the monitoring, send the data to them. Why? Because Ecology needed the information to assess whether their design standards were appropriate and fix them if they weren't. Well, great, that's their job. But some of us were starting to feel like them getting that information they need to do their jobs by us collecting it, it's kind of the long way around for them to get the information. Plus, permittees face non-compliance in the permit if we screw the monitoring up somehow. And not only that, but there's this other question that kept coming up. Why are we paying for information that they need to do their jobs? Now, the answer, and Bill may laugh when I say this, was Ecology can't afford to pay for it. We can make you pay for it. And most of us said, well, true. Okay, well, let's move on. Then Dr. Robert Chandler, the eminent colleague of mine from Seattle, said something crazy. He said, actually, Seattle doesn't have a problem with paying for monitoring. What we want to do is write a check and send it to Ecology. And if the check doesn't bounce, we've complied with the permit. And we all laughed and said, that's crazy. That's not happening. And then about a year later, Luann Coachman of King County said, hey, let's have a meeting with the environmental groups to see what our common goals and concerns are. And we said, sure, that's a great idea. We like talking with them. And then Heather Trim, during one of these meetings, I think she was with Washington Environmental Council at the time, said, let's get the California stormwater experts up to talk about their regional monitoring programs in LA and in the Bay Area. And my reaction was, I hadn't thought about that. So I don't know, I guess it seems far-fetched they'll come up. So less than a year later, I'm sitting in a ballroom in Tacoma with like 500 people listening to the California stormwater experts talk about the regional monitoring programs, which included regional funding mechanisms. And then they flew back to California and we looked at each other and said, I guess it's not impossible. I guess they actually do that. And so through multiple thousands of hours more of collaborative talking and hammering out details, we ended up with the monitoring program we have. And so my message is that I don't think Larry was really asking me to give is a lot of things only look impossible to me because I don't know how to do them right now and I don't have an idea about how to do them. And through collaboration with a lot of different people, what I found is stuff that looks impossible to me at one day, a week later looks commonplace, or maybe 18 years later. And I've got to have fun and making friends with an amazing group of people along the way. So if that sounds good to you, even if you don't stick with stormwater, you know, pick up the phone, call somebody who you think might have really different views than you, and ask them how to do something impossible. And above all, make friends and have fun.
Bill, I want to go back. I want to go back a little bit and explore. I think it was a couple key events that a lot of people newer to this profession may not realize, and that was referring to that meeting with the permittees and the environmental advocacy. That was a time where there's a lot of visceral and emotional feelings and opinions about the direction of monitoring and the permit were being voiced. And prior to that powwow, usually the conversation were permittees with ecology, environmental advocacy community with ecology, and there really hadn't been that face-to-face discussion between the permittees and environmental advocacy community. And when that meeting occurred, which was a face-to-face with the permittees and the environmental advocacy community, what emerged was, I think, a pretty common vision. And that common vision spurred the suggestion for that workshop in Tacoma, I don't know, that you talked about. And there was 3 speakers, 2 from California, 1 from Colorado, was my recollection. And they shared their lessons learned about pulling together a regional monitoring framework to work more for, I guess, the permittees' interest than solely the regulators. And interesting enough, the advice that was shared from those 3 programs is don't have the regulator lead it. And I was wondering if you wanted to share the story of how Ecology got, you know, stuck leading this. Really, they weren't really wanting to take that role on, but we couldn't find a taker.
You know, I guess I can't really cover that last part. I think that what I saw with that meeting was, you know, I remember a meeting with what we call the Gang of 7, which is the phase 1 stormwater coordinators, and Luann Coachman just saying, in this sweet spot between after the appeals happened and before the public review draft is issued, which is a sweet spot in a permit cycle, she said, hey, let's just have a meeting and talk with them, because we all know we got stuff in common, and now's the time to just sort of get our common goals and visions worked out. And we just kind of looked around the room and said, well, that's a good idea. Sure. You know, we like a lot of, you know, we all like each other, or most of us do anyway. And so let's chat. And I didn't have any idea necessarily what was going to come out of that. I didn't expect that a big factor out of that process was going to be the monitoring program. I envisioned some of the other programs in the permit in S5 were going to be the big things that something was going to emerge from. But you know, who knew that monitoring was going to happen? But, you know, there again, I think a big part of it was, you know, Robert throwing at this idea that, hey, what's the problem Seattle has is not what everybody else is griping about. Seattle just love to pay. Just tell us a number, we'll write a check. And I pretty much think the rest of us were thinking, what? Gosh, we're arguing about all kinds of things, but that wasn't one of them. And but it, you know, so it anyway, that's what I can say. I think Ecology is always, the last thing they needed was to take on a massive extra part of the permit. but they did, bless their hearts, and I love them for it.
The history of where should we go with this regional program? How is it administered? Were you writing some of the checks to emerge? And at first, we were looking for a non-regulator to play that role, but this was so new. There were a lot of questions and hesitation. For example, at one point, the Washington Stormwater Center was suggested as playing that role. But their attorneys advised them, too many unanswered questions, let's not go there. And so, I think there was a couple other ideas thrown out, but there was no taker. So at least initially, I think Ecology was a little reluctant to take on that role too. But in absence of any other actor being available to step up, they stepped up, and they, I think in hindsight and talking to the Stormwater Center now, Ecology had more of the administrative framework to handle the finance element of it too. And so that led to this, I guess, process part with the Stormwater Working Group, kind of as an oversight body made up of the stakeholders, permittees, federal, state, local, environmental advocacy groups, etc., to help.
And I think, and Larry, I think
that process.
I think a key thing about that was that, and Bill may have a different view, or Ann might, but that first off, a lot of the information, it was recognized by everybody that Ecology was the entity that, when push came to shove, if nobody else had an obligation to get information, to think about what the permit conditions should be, it was Ecology's job to do that. It's their permit. And so they recognized that they needed to have the information, and they couldn't just let the program that was supposed to generate information for them go out of their hands. But the other aspect was, it's a lot of public money washing around, and they're already collecting money. And has been said in the chat, it was kind of like they have a system for handling money, and it's like legally established. And so I don't think many of us said the problem is nobody can figure out who should be able to handle the money. It was more like, what should the program look like, and how can we best decide what to spend the money on, which was the development of the Stormwater Action Monitoring Program. And that's
So
where a lot of the thought was.
And
yeah, I'll just jump in with a couple of points. When I think about getting back to your question, Larry, I agree, and the chat is also verifying that we did consider a whole bunch of different entities to lead it or to administer this program. I think what's important is that Ecology stepped up to support and coordinate the program. The permittees lead the program. It's a very collaborative program, and Ecology is there as a great resource, technical, administrative, etc. But what's exciting about this program is how active so many permittees are. So they're not just writing a check, they're continuing to select the projects, to direct the work, and that's great. And they're also involved in the administrative oversight. I also think what's interesting is that there's a big difference between the capacity of a phase 1 community, the folks who were doing the monitoring in 2007, to run a sophisticated monitoring program, and the 100 plus or the 85 plus communities in Western Washington, or the 60 in Puget Sound even, to run the phase 2 communities to run individual monitoring programs. Some are very large, sophisticated jurisdictions that have staff who do water quality monitoring, or have scientific expertise. But some of these jurisdictions are very small, and to ask them to implement monitoring programs was not pragmatic, and it probably would not have yielded the kind of results and information that would help inform our programs or inform the permit. So I think it was a very sensible choice to pull our resources together and direct them to the right kind of ambient water quality monitoring program, the right kinds of effectiveness studies, et cetera, to give the whole region the information it needs to advance our work.
Thanks, Ann. Hey, we have about 10, 15 minutes left here. So I want to open it up to questions. I see we got a lot of commentary. A lot of folks are reflecting on their memories. I see we have one individual sharing that this is kind of reminds them of a little PTSD maybe. So question, what are the panelists' thoughts on the benefits and challenges adding numeric benchmarks to the municipal permits?
Well, when I think of numerical benchmarks, I think about end of pipe monitoring, and I don't know if that's what Catherine had in mind, the kind of benchmark you see in industrial permits or even construction stormwater general permits. I think because these are programmatic permits, I'm not sure what those benchmarks would look like. So I think it'd be worth exploring, but I don't know how it fits into the philosophical framework that these permits are built around. Bill, Leif, or Larry, either of you guys have a thought on that?
With numerical benchmarks, it reminds me what a former Secretary of Transportation used to say. You manage what you measure, and so if you do set numerical benchmarks, I think they need to be very thoughtfully set, because you could pretty much find yourself, if you're not careful, managing to the test, so to speak. So, Bill, your thoughts?
I think that, now I'll just start babbling. No, you said it well.
Bill, any thoughts? You're muted, Bill.
Oh, I was asking if Wilmot Moore is still here.
So, yeah, I think he might have got kicked off here. So if you or Ann had a magic wand, and looking back, if there's anything in the history of the permit's evolution and development could be done differently, what are your thoughts about that? Would there be anything you would change if you were empowered to do so?
I've kind of learned in my life that anytime I start thinking I am wise enough to go back and change the past, I'm going to be wrong. I think that the evolution of the permit, happened kind of about like it needed to happen. I mean, we came from a permit that was not even described in the form of a permit in a set of federal regulations, and wrestled with it, and it has to fit into a framework of ESA compliance, Federal Drinking Water Act compliance because that's where the intersection between groundwater is in terms of federal water protection. All the other federal laws and state laws, and what people want. If I was gonna change anything, I just tell people to meet even more. So that's my main message. Was we really worked hard on this, a lot of us together, and it was if it was logical, any one of us could have just thought it up and set it in motion, but we really needed everybody in the room.
And what are your thoughts? Anything if you were empowered, you would do differently?
Well, a couple of things. Back in, I think it was 2002, maybe, there was a Ecology received direction from the legislature and were tasked with putting together a report to the legislature on what the stormwater permits would look like, the stormwater programs would look like moving forward. And one of the ideas that advisory group to Ecology provided was possibly putting together a tiered phase 2 permit. So recognizing that small jurisdictions can't do all the same things that large jurisdictions can do just because they don't have as many staff resources. And so I sort of have wondered over the years, one thing is if we should have different requirements or different expectations, compliance expectations based on the size. So maybe if there was a smallest phase 2 and a medium-sized phase 2 and a largest phase 2 jurisdictions, if we would have different compliance expectations for those different buckets, if you will. So that's one idea. I don't know if it's the right answer or not, but I do know that small jurisdictions really struggle to build the comprehensive programs that Ecology has laid out. And then the other thing, having been both at Ecology and now working for a local government, Ecology works really hard to understand what kinds of programs make sense and are effective and can tie in with permittees' other work and programs. But state agencies are not local governments. And so I think maybe having a little bit more of an interactive permit development process would really help with requirements like stormwater management action planning or LID integration, understanding what it would take for a local government to implement those programs, I think could have informed permittee requirements so that those requirements made more sense to local governments and so they felt like they could be more successful in implementing them. So those are just a couple of thoughts.
Karen asked whether your bill have any reflections on how far stormwater management has come over the past, 20, 30 years.
When I started doing stormwater management, such as it was in 1991, the theory was get stormwater away from where you don't want it and send it somewhere else. And for God's sakes, get it out of the road prison at all cost. And the text is saying prison, that's prism. Get it out of the road bed at all costs. And then we now have what we have now. I think a key thing I would say is that other paradigms always come in. For those of you who remember West Nile virus, the West Nile virus came out as a thing, it reemerged as it does every 50 years or so. And the public health experts said, those crazy stormwater people are building mosquito breeding ponds. And we said, yeah, they're a great idea. And they said, they're a terrible idea. And I just thought, well, I guess it's just time for a, you know, to assess the paradigm. We found out in California what they do to control mosquitoes is they set fire to their stormwater ponds every year. The real thing. And I said, I don't know that we're going to do that in Washington, but maybe someday. So it's just ever evolving, and some new thing is going to come up tomorrow, and it's going to be thrown on my desk, and people are going to say, what do we do about this? And I'll say, I don't know. I guess that's what makes this job interesting is it's stormwater is the consequence of everything that happens upstream. Keeps it interesting.
And any reflections from you?
I think it's really exciting to see how, in how many ways our jurisdictions, both at the local level and working with our state partners, with our nonprofit partners, how much we get out of collaborating. And I think we've really found that when we are sharing ideas and resources and innovations, our community, our work just moves so much faster and improves so much. And so I think over the last 20 to 30 years, we have seen those opportunities to coordinate and to collaborate really expand, and we've taken great advantage of that. I think about the Storm Group and how we're doing that and building very sophisticated outreach and behavior change programs together. I think about how our understanding of LID has enhanced. I think about what our stormwater effectiveness studies are showing us. I really think the collective is much stronger than the individual jurisdictions, and you don't see that in other permits. So it's a very unique world that we work and exist in. So I don't know that really directly talks about how far stormwater management has come in the last several decades, but I think it is a really unique and wonderful part of working in municipal stormwater.
Yeah, I agree with you, Anne. My observation is over the years, the community of discussion and the breadth of discussion has evolved. There was always a lot of discussion, but I think it expanded just from permittees talking and grumbling amongst themselves to working with, Ecology, the regulators, environmental advocacy community on solutions. I think there's a different era today than there was 10, 20 years ago. There's a lot of new professionals entering our field, and a lot of retirements going on. Matter of fact, that was some of my motivation for this idea on the panel discussion. Unfortunately, Bill Moore had internet failed, so we kind of lost his thoughts and insight along the way here. But going forward, any advice you would give to young professionals entering our field?
Oh God, I still want to think of myself as a young professional in this field. No, I think, it is a very, I think, as you've probably seen in other presentations, really reach out and take advantage of the resources around you. This is a very collaborative field. So to the newer folks, I would encourage you to seek out your neighbors and look for opportunities to coordinate and collaborate. It helps raise, the playing field. That helps raise the quality of the work across the region if we can build that expertise, jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
Yeah. Well, we're about out of time. I want to thank our panelists, and I'll thank Bill Moore offline. I want to thank those who attended our session. If you have any additional questions, please send them our way. The contact information is in the program. Enjoy the rest of your conference, everybody. Thank you very much.